All right, here we go. Let's get back into it. See if we can talk about Dr. Welcher's report. Who do y'all have in the chip off? I asked this in the question in the chat. Would you go with Dr. Wolfe or Dr. Welcher?
May I inquire, Your Honor?
Yes.
Dr. Wolfe, where are we on the chart? I've lost my place.
I think hypothesis.
Okay. Let's describe, if you would, please, what role hypothesis plays in the general scientific method.
So generally, it's like I said, it's an if-then statement. So if you make a statement, if the arm contacts the taillight, then the taillight will shatter, right? So you want to do tests and experimentation and analyze that data to see whether you can accept or reject that hypothesis.
And what's the next stage?
So as I mentioned, after hypothesis, it's once you've determined that, what your hypothesis is, you want to test with experimentation, analyze that data, and that certainly may be an iterative process that you do multiple times to then be able to draw a conclusion from that analysis and testing.
What's the next stage?
To basically report those conclusions and findings.
Why is it important to report those conclusions and findings?
Well, I think so that you can, whether you can accept or reject the hypothesis that was put forward earlier.
Do you have to analyze the data following the testing that you undertake?
Yes, like I mentioned, I think it's an iterative process, because certainly you could do one test and it may not be clear what the answer is at that point, so you may have to do additional tests to basically parametrically evaluate your hypothesis.
Did you see this well, let me ask you first, did you undertake this scientific method with regard to your reconstruction or your testing in this case?
Yes.
Did you observe this same scenario in Dr. Welcher's report?
Sustained as to that form, Mr. Jackson.
Did you see this undertaken
anywhere
anywhere
else? Come on, AJ, you got it.
Sustained there.
Leading.
Did you look for testing in Dr. Welcher's evaluation, all of his data?
Yes.
Did you find any?
No.
Other than the static blue paint test?
That was the only test, correct.
Did you see any force
Not
dynamics
the blue
testing?
paint. Oh, man.
That's leading, so you can
Sure.
get to it without that.
What about
He
any
said
other
other
testing?
than the blue paint,
Anything
he took a
else
shot at the blue paint.
we've
That's
talked
dirty,
about?
AJ.
Did you see anything
Dang.
else done in Dr. Welcher's
As it
report?
pertains to an analysis to the taillight and the damage and the forces, no.
That's crazy.
Let's move on to the next slide.
That's crazy. He attacked the blue
Did
paint.
you actually undertake testing in furtherance of the scientific method?
Yes.
Let's move on to the next slide, and you can describe what we're talking about. What are we looking at here?
So you're looking at a test matrix of the various tests that we conducted at ARCA. I could go through them one by one if you want.
Let me ask you foundationally, was your testing directed toward determining whether or not the scenario proposed in Dr. Welcher's report was consistent or inconsistent with what you would find, ultimately?
The objection sustained.
Was your testing specifically designed to determine whether the damage to Miss Reed's vehicle, her Lexus, was consistent with the scenario that was proposed by Dr. Welcher?
That's sustained too. Ask it differently, Mr. Jackson.
What was your testing? What were you engaged in terms of your testing? What were you trying to find out?
Well, I think it was to, again, we talked about earlier about that hypothesis, right? My understanding, Dr. Welcher indicated that the arm contacted the taillight, but there was no analysis or testing to determine what's the expected outcome of that. What's the damage to the taillight?
So you answered the first question. I'm striking that second part. Ask another question.
Was there anything else?
I think simply put, it's to find out what happens when you impact an arm with a Lexus taillight at various speeds. What happens?
What was your understanding of Dr. Welcher's hypothesis?
That's sustained.
Did you have an understanding of Dr. Welcher's hypothesis?
That's sustained too.
Ultimately, what were you trying to find out through your testing?
As I mentioned, I think it was to determine when you impact a taillight at 10 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour, what happens to the taillight? What's the expected damage? What happens to a sweatshirt when it makes contact with that? What happens to the fragments? How does the arm move? What's the acceleration of the arm? What's the change in speed of the arm? And certainly, as I mentioned, my colleague Dr. Rentschler will discuss what are the expected injuries in that type of impact.
Did you see any of those questions answered in Dr. Welcher's report?
Ask it differently.
What did
Dr.
you see
Welcher's getting
in terms
cooked
of
right
Dr.
now.
Welcher's report as it relates to those types of questions?
That's sustained.
Ultimately, did you undertake a methodology to perform the testing to answer the questions that you just explained needed to be answered for this jury?
Yes.
Describe that, please.
So we started out,
She said
we
no
kind of
leading
worked at
today.
this incrementally, right? We didn't start right off the bat with utilizing an exemplar Lexus going right into an ATD or a test dummy, right? We wanted to start in the laboratory to have an understanding what happens at a range of speeds, in this instance, in our first two tests, between 10 and 17 miles per hour, right? What happens, what kind of damage do we observe, right? At 10 miles an hour, do we even break the light? At 17, what kind of damage do we get? What kind of accelerations do we get? And then we moved up to full-scale vehicle impact testing.
Is that methodology that you just described generally accepted in the field of accident reconstruction, in the broader field of engineering?
Absolutely. Everything from utilizing an instrumented test dummy to using an exemplar vehicle to all the data acquisition systems that we had in the laboratory as well as the vehicle. All of that is generally accepted techniques in the field of accident reconstruction to evaluate what we did in this case.
And are those techniques also supported by peer-reviewed articles in scientific literature related to accident reconstruction?
Yes.
Did you rely on this methodology that you just described to render opinions and conclusions as it relates to this case?
Yes.
Have you relied on that same methodology in rendering opinions and conclusions in other courts?
Yes.
Let's go to the next slide, please. What are we looking at here?
So we've gone over this before, but this is looking at the exemplar vehicle that we utilize for the latter part of our testing. You're looking at again, just annotating where the liftgate taillight is as well as the quarter panel taillight.
When you say exemplar vehicle, what is this SUV that we're looking at?
So it's the same year, make, and model of the subject vehicle. So it's a 2021 Lexus LX 570. So it's the same weight, same geometry, same as the subject vehicle.
Is this a picture off the internet, or do you actually have access to this truck?
We have access to that vehicle, yes.
And ultimately, what testing did you undertake specifically as it relates to this particular vehicle?
We did full-scale vehicle testing with the vehicle driving into an ATD arm as well as an ATD arm attached to a dummy and then a full-on impact to a test dummy.
Did you assess the damage to the right tail light after these various tests?
Yes, after all of the tests.
Did you assess the acceleration and quantify the forces that were involved?
Yes.
Did you assess the material and textile damage to the clothed ATD?
Yes.
Ultimately, did you conduct lab tests in an effort to answer some of these questions as well?
Yes.
And you've already mentioned this, but you utilized in your testing the exemplar vehicle to the fullest extent that you felt necessary?
Absolutely,
Were
yes.
you hampered or hindered in any way in terms of damaging the vehicle or utilizing the vehicle in any way that you wished?
No.
Let's go to the next slide, please. What are tests A and B? What are those laboratory tests?
So these were the initial two tests that we did to get an idea of starting to test this hypothesis. As I mentioned, we weren't sure at 10 miles an hour what would happen to the taillight. We wanted to see what would happen at 17 miles an hour with the arm. So again, it was to evaluate from a starting point what happens in this interaction based upon how Dr. Welcher had his arm oriented in his PowerPoint and analysis.
Next slide, please. What is this?
So you're looking at a photograph of our lab setup. You can see on the left side of that is our hybrid 3 anthropomorphic test device. To the right is a linear impactor, and this is something we already have in-house that we built years ago for our testing that we do for the National Hockey League, when we're looking at what's the accelerations on an impact to a goalie wearing a helmet, right? We'd use this same device for that type of testing to measure head acceleration. So we applied this same linear impactor to be able to project, if you will, or accelerate the taillight at a known speed into the ATD arm.
What are some of the instrumentation that you use in addition to the mechanical impactor? What's some of the instrumentation you use to track the data?
Data.
So you can see, I'll get my, see around here. So at the top here, there's a blue camera here. There's another blue camera here. So these are our high-speed cameras. And you'll see there's a bunch of lights around those high speeds. That's just because the frame rate's so high. And again, it's only sampling a very, very short amount of time. So you have to have a lot of light when you do these high-speed tests. So we have the high-speed cameras running. We have an accelerometer mounted to the ATD arm here on the other side. So that's some of the instrumentation. There's also a couple other cameras that we're documenting this overall.
Can we move to the next slide, please? What are we looking at in these photographs?
So this is looking at, and not to be confused, this wasn't the arm position when the impact occurred. This is just showing you the setup. So on the left is just kind of an overall shot, and then on the right is, right here, is a uniaxial accelerometer. So that's going to measure, we talked about that term earlier, right, the acceleration. So that's going to measure how quickly is this arm changing its speed, right? What's the acceleration of the arm as it's impacted?
Does that accelerometer put into motion some of the mathematical formulations that you talked about earlier?
Yes.
Let's move to the next slide, please. Tell me about these photographs.
So the importance of this is, more specifically looking at the right photograph here, might be a little bit hard to see, but we wanted to get the same exact sweatshirt or hoodie for the testing to evaluate if the taillight breaks, is there a mechanism for the fragments to penetrate and cause holes in the sweatshirt as were observed in Mr. John O'Keefe's sweatshirt?
Next slide. Were you successful in finding the exact replica sweatshirt?
Yes, and I will note, as I mentioned, I know it probably is hard to see, but the material blend on the sleeves are the exact same. They are 60% cotton and 40% polyester. Was
it important in your mind to maintain consistency with the data that you had received concerning John O'Keefe's clothing?
Certainly. I think we wanted to try to control as many variables as we could.
Let's move to the next slide, please. Test A. Describe Test A for us, please.
So you're going to see a series of photographs and then videos. But Test A was mounting a preconditioned taillight on that linear impactor to accelerate it into the hybrid 3 arm to, again, evaluate the damage to the taillight and the acceleration to the arm.
Let's move to the next slide, please. What are we looking at in these photographs?
So you're looking on the left, a photograph just before the impact test was conducted. On the right, you're looking at a thermal image that is depicting the temperature profile of the taillight.
Describe that thermal image.
Certainly. Your Honor, may I refer to my notes?
Yes.
So what I did is I analyzed the profile of the temperature down in this area. And when we look at that segment, that lower portion here, where contact was made, the average temperature in that area was about 34 degrees with a minimum of about 33 degrees.
How did you get that Exemplar taillight down to around freezing?
So all of the taillights that we tested were preconditioned overnight in a freezer.
Why was that important?
Well, it's my understanding that at the time that this allegedly occurred, the ambient temperature was 31 degrees Fahrenheit. So as I mentioned earlier, certainly there's a correlation between how plastics perform in cold weather. So we wanted to take that variable into account in our testing to precondition them down to temperatures that were consistent with at the time of the alleged incident.
Next slide, please. What are we looking at in this slide, on this photograph?
So this is a video. Do you want me to go ahead and play the video?
Tell us what we're about to see, and then I'll ask the court's permission.
So you were looking at a camera that is mounted above the entire setup. If you look at the top portion of this video, you will see the tail light. Part of it's covered by the high-speed camera. But what will happen is the linear impactor will fire, and the tail light will be accelerated up to 10 miles per hour, striking the clothed ATD arm.
With the court's permission,
Okay.
let's go ahead and play the video.
Oh, interesting. We get to see the video. This is so dope.
Next slide, please. What is this?
So this is also a video, but with the high-speed camera. So it's the high-speed camera that's looking top down at the arm. So you will see when the video plays, you will see the tail light enter from the left and contact the arm. And I will note that this is essentially slow mode, so it's not happening in real time. So you'll see the tail light slowly moving, but it's actually in reality moving at 10 miles per hour.
Understood. Go ahead and play that. Can I ask a question now that that's played? How did you mount the taillight to the accelerator, that linear accelerator?
Right. So we had to get a little bit creative there because you may have observed this when we had the physical assembly out earlier. The back of that, it's not some nice clean surface that we can just bolt on. So what we had to do is 3D print a bracket that we could bolt onto the linear impactor, and we used a polyurethane expanding foam to be able to marry those two together so that we could then bolt it onto the linear impactor to use it for this test.
Did you see any debris from that foam mounting mechanism?
Yes, there's a few flakes you can see of that polyurethane foam off the backside kind of going into being dispersed there.
Okay. With regard to this particular 10-mile-an-hour test, what did you note in terms of the damage to the taillight?
It was very minimal.
And what did you note in terms of any damage at all to the hoodie?
There was none.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What are we looking at in this slide?
So this is looking at a side view. So same test, just looking at it from the side. And similarly, you'll see the tail light come from the left and impact the arm.
If we could play this, please. What did you note in terms of deflection of the arm, the test arm?
Well, the arm essentially, and we'll see this in the data later, it reaches a common velocity with the tail light. Based upon the portion of the arm that was contacted, again, consistent with how Dr. Welcher has it oriented, it will become accelerated up to 10 miles an hour roughly.
Over approximately what period of time is that arm accelerated up to 10 miles an hour along with the tail light?
We'll see it on the
This is
data plots. I
dope.
think it's about 10 milliseconds or so.
How long, do you know how long an eye blink on average takes?
Off the top of my head, no, I don't. Probably pretty quick.
Somewhere around 250 milliseconds? Does that sound right?
Sustained.
Let's move to the next slide, please. What are we looking at in this series of photographs?
So these are extracted frames from the high-speed video that we just saw on the previous slide, basically showing just at contact, just after contact, and then post-contact, so you can see the kinematics of the arm and how the arm is moving.
Okay.
Looks like he would have
Let's move
snapped
to the
his
next slide,
wrist.
please. What is this
This is
photograph?
crazy.
So this is photographs taken of the taillight after the 10-mile-an-hour test. I will note that there was a couple small fragments of the clear portion of the assembly, the outer lens that was missing from that turn signal area towards the left here. There was a couple fragments missing, and then there was some small fracturing here in that area.
How would you describe the damage to the taillight of the 10-mile-an-hour test?
If I may go to the next slide, I think it might.
Sure.
So this was the totality of that damage at 10 miles per hour. So I would describe it as minimal and superficial.
Okay. Next slide, please. What is this?
So this is the photograph that I just shown you compared to that of the subject taillight, so that you can have a side-by-side comparison of the test taillight compared to that of the subject.
Were you able to reach any opinions and conclusions about whether the damage to the subject taillight is consistent with striking an arm at 10 miles an hour?
It's inconsistent, in my opinion.
Next slide, please. This is still test A, is that correct?
Correct.
Were you able to reach any opinions or conclusions as to whether or not the damage to Mr. O'Keefe's clothing is consistent with being struck by the taillight at 10 miles per hour?
What I observed from the test is that there was no mechanism to create any of the holes that we observed on the subject sweatshirt.
Do you hold that opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty,
Yes.
as well as the former opinion that you just gave us?
Yes.
Next slide, please. What are we looking at in this graph?
So this is a graph that shows roughly, on the next graph, you're going to see a 24 millisecond window. So what I want to show you on this graph is what does that look like over a full second, so you can have an appreciation of just how quickly this is occurring. As you mentioned earlier, I think your comment about a blink of an eye, this is even shorter than that. We're looking at, as you'll see on the next graph, again, it spans over just a few milliseconds. So that yellow tick that you see in the middle there, what I've done is I've plotted that over a full second. So 1 second is equal to 1,000 milliseconds. So if we go 500 milliseconds to the right, 500 milliseconds to the left, this whole graph represents 1 second in time. This impact duration is occurring very quickly.
1 second, is that reflected from the beginning of the graph to the end of the graph? That's representative of 1 second, is that right?
Correct. So starting at this y-axis all the way to here is 1 second in time, with our impact duration happening over just a few milliseconds.
And this was at 10 miles an hour?
Yes.
Next slide, please. What are we looking at in this graph?
So we're looking at the acceleration or the change in speed over time, that parameter that we discussed earlier. So what you can see is that as the arm is impacted, we had the accelerometer mounted on the inside portion of the forearm, if you will. You see that it starts to accelerate, right? Because it's changing its speed, and then it starts to level off after the impact has subsided, basically, and it's reached a common velocity.
What do we see in terms of the G-forces that the arm is subject to?
So the peak is occurring right around here at about, looks like just over 6 milliseconds. And the peak acceleration is just over 130 Gs.
And what does that mean? What is a G?
So a G is
a measure of force.
Acceleration due to gravity. So if we're being held down by 1 G, so you could think of it as basically a multiplication factor, that it's 131 times the acceleration due to gravity.
And the next slide, please. What are we looking at in this slide?
So this is, again, that concept that we talked about earlier, delta V. This is the change in speed. So if we do some math to the previous data that we collected, it's a technique called integration, where we can actually add up all of that acceleration to determine what speed did the arm get up to. And when we do that calculation to this data, what we see is that initially at the impact, right, the arm's at rest, right, Newton's law, first law. and then we impart a force on it in terms of the tail light impacting it. It's going to cause the arm to accelerate and change its speed. So as I noted earlier, it's essentially going to reach a common velocity with the impact force based upon how Dr. Welcher has the arm oriented. And we can see that it's a tick over 10 miles per hour at just over 10 milliseconds. So that means that the arm in a 10 millisecond period is going from 0 up to about 10 miles per hour, which was the speed of the impact.
And
which isn't great.
131 times the force of gravity is exerted on the arm at the same time.
Sustained is to that point.
Where does gravity play into this? What is the 131 Gs? Where's that force exerted?
So that is the acceleration that the arm experienced as a result of that impact. So that's how quickly it was changing in speed.
Understood. Let's go to the next slide.
Let's go, Mr.
So is
Tesla.
this a good place to take the morning recess? All right, folks, we'll take a recess. Dr. Wolfe, you can file the jurors. Witness counsel regarding just scheduling, please.
All rise for the court, please.
Ooh, Dr. Wolfe is up there cooking. What do y'all think about this? I mean, he's breaking it down so smooth, so easily, and answering a lot of questions we had. Why wasn't his arm broken if that's what really happened? And then we're calling it a side swipe. I mean, okay, Dr. Welcher, if it's a side swipe, you're still not going to have other injuries? Come on, man. Not looking good for the Commonwealth right now. Let me know what y'all think in the comments and in the chat.